Right, those of you online, we are going back live.
Okay, team, we're back in session and we'll continue our work with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee led by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I share the responsibility for the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. We are starting today with an action on first read, SLA1, which is the new member appointments for the State Advisory Council on Indian Education. We all heard the report from this group last month, and we are now well aware of the important work that they do. And so it's a pleasure to recognize Dr. Silver and learn about the folks who are being recommended to join the council. Dr. Silver, I believe this is you.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon again, everyone. The North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs Board has approved the following members that you have in your attachments to be seated on the State Advisory Council on Indian Education in alignment with legislation that was passed in 2015 to ensure a balance of parent members and educator members. Two of those that are being recommended for seats will be serving a second term if approved. They are Cameo Lanning from the Eastern Band of Cherokee, who would be serving in a parent role, and Ms. Rhea Jacobs, who is an educator in Columbus County and is from the Waccamaw tribe, and she would be returning for a second term. The other members would be new appointments, so they'd be approved for a first term and later be eligible for a second term, should that be deemed appropriate. They are Amanda Frizzard, who's a member of the Halawassaponi tribe, and she would be coming in as a parent member. We also have Miss Tina Lance, who is a member of the Saponi tribe and who is also coming in as a parent role. And then we have Ms. Brandy Jacobs, who is a member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, who was nominated by the Triangle Native Society, who is an educator in Wake County. We are asking for action on first read, as the members who were honored this morning, who were recognized this morning, will be attending their last meeting next week on May 20th. Any questions about the nominees that I could answer for anyone?
Questions for Dr. Silver? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Dr. Silver.
Thank you.
We now have 3 items for action this month. We heard about all 3 last month, but briefly, I'm going to ask Ms. Shaw Coltrane to go over SLA 2 and 3, which are both policy amendments, and then we'll turn to Ms. Thomas for SLA 4.
Hello, Ms. Kamnitz. So hope you are well. Hello, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, all other board members and advisors, and anybody else listening in. So for the course for credit update, it is mostly to clarify all of the alignment to the new social studies courses, to ensure there's clarity with when those courses can be taken in middle school for acceleration purposes, and some just other tweaks that we reviewed last month. That's for course for credit. The second policy is Grad 008. It also speaks to our new social studies course, but that we have done deep analysis and with stakeholder feedback. LEA's really asked us to see if the founding principles of the United States of America and North Carolina civic literacy could be satisfied with AP government and politics. And so we have done a review. It is very clearly aligned, but we did, just to ensure that we did put in the required elements from the legislation in the policy as well. So all teachers knew very clearly that if they taught this, they had to make sure to teach those elements. So those are those 2 items, Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Shaw Coltrane? Hearing none, SLA 4 is Governor's School appointments, and I believe is it Ms. Thomas or Mr. Winton?
Afternoon, it's Ms. Thomas. Mr. Winton is working
Hello.
previously on Governor's School. Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, and members of the board. We are back to talk about the Governor's School Board of Governors appointees. And we have a vacancy, if you will recall, in the Sandhills region, in the Northwest region, and then we have an at-large position. And so I believe Superintendent Truitt has reviewed all of these recommendations. We also have 3 people that were up for renewal, and they have agreed to serve a second term, which is allowed in our policy and our bylaws. So our real determination at this point is that at-large position. I'm going to turn to Superintendent Truitt to see if she has made or has a recommendation for that at-large.
No, I do not at this time.
So, Ms. Thomas, to be clear, what would we be voting on today? Or today?
We could vote on the Northwest and the Sandhills and come back for the at-large position.
Okay, and those names are?
I apologize. I ran up here quickly and I don't have that in front of me. It is on the chart, though. I believe it's in the SLA. I just can't read that. I apologize. It is in the executive summary, and I apologize for not having that in front of me. I didn't grab that piece of paper.
Ms. Candace, I have
Could we?
names for the second terms, and Ms. Thomas can confirm.
Okay.
I have Kristen Doe, Michael Elder, and Fannie Williams.
And then there's a recommendation in the executive summary for Sandhills and for Northwest. So,
Recommendation for the Sandhills is Mr. Tommy Macon. And the recommendation for the Northwest region is Ms. Tracy Waters.
thanks, Superintendent.
So we would be approving 5 appointments to the Governor's School Board. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Any questions from the board? Does anyone need any more clarity on what we're approving here or voting on here? All right. We've got Tommy Macon, Tracy Waters, Kristen Doe, Michael Elder, and Fannie Williams. Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you.
2 items for discussion. SLA 5, Career and Technical Education Entrepreneurial Experience. I think this is a perfect follow-up to the recognition that Mr. Michael received this morning for his excellent work in our CTE space. And here he is with another work-based learning option for our students, which is going to enrich that experience for many of them. So Mr. Michael, if you will walk us through this.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz, and good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, members of the board and advisors. Excuse me. I am pleased to present a significant opportunity to you today for our children and the local economies and cities in which they reside. Traditionally, CTE has offered students the opportunity to earn academic credit for 3 forms of work-based learning: apprenticeships, cooperative education, and then internships, which may be paid or unpaid depending on the location or the business. What we have learned in CTE after many years of offering entrepreneurship education is that many students are interested in operating their own business in a field that they are passionate about, can sustain themselves, others, and their local communities. The entrepreneurial experience would offer students an opportunity to build it and experience it while under the mentorship and guidance of a qualified classroom instructor. Next slide, please. In preparation for this proposed revision, we've worked with Ms. Sneha Shah Coltrane to align it to academic credit policies and Tom Zyko to prepare for potential rulemaking. We've adjusted the language to be more specific and added definitions to existing terminology. The major revision would be the addition of the entrepreneurial experience as a fourth option to the existing policy. As you can see on the slide, we would revise CTED 003 to include the entrepreneurial experience as a fourth option beginning July 1st, 2022, so a year to prepare. We've also proposed that we revise the minimum number of hours required from 135 to 120. And just for perspective, our current reach of entrepreneurship education in North Carolina and CTE, we have 17,000 plus participants last year in our Exploring Business and Entrepreneurship middle grades course, 6,900 in our first level entrepreneurship course in high school, 240 in our second level. And then we also have the National Academy Foundation Academy of Finance, which is a finance and entrepreneurship half credit course that had 80 plus participants in 2019, 2020. The entrepreneurial experience work-based learning credit would be available to all CTE students who have successfully completed a CTE concentrator course in one of our approved pathways. Two examples of this, because we do have concentration in a multitude of ways, would be, as you see on the screen, Computer Science Principles 1, Computer Science Principles 2, and then the child would be eligible to take the entrepreneurial experience. That's a situation where we only require 2 courses for concentration. In some limited situations, we do require 3 courses. A good example of this would be the second example. We have Construction Core, which outlines much of the safety, health, OSHA 10, OSHA 30 type of things that the gentleman talked about earlier this morning. Then they would take Electrical Trades 1, Electrical Trades 2, and they would be eligible for the entrepreneurial experience at that time. We set it up this way so that the child would be well-versed in the content that they have a passion for and a potential career pathway to lead them into their future careers, so that they would have that content knowledge prior to setting up a small business themselves. We do see 2 significant benefits to students from this proposal. First of which being that this would expand an opportunity for all CTE concentrators to pursue a business venture with appropriate guidance and support in an industry related to their focus of their career. And second, the entrepreneurial experience would expand work-based learning opportunities to some of our rural communities, which currently may not be able to support traditional work-based learning options just due to their location and the limited number of businesses in their communities. And with that, I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for bringing us this great opportunity for our students, Mr. Michael. Are there any questions from the board or advisors? Hearing none. Let's move on to SLA 6, the North Carolina AIG Program Standards Update. Ms. Shaw Coltrane again. It is, we're about to start the next cycle of the AIG program updating, and so this is an update to the standards before that process starts. Ms. Shaw Coltrane.
Oh, thank you so much, Ms. Camnett. That's exactly right. So board members, your districts will be starting their 3-year cycle to develop their local AIG plans. And so this is the process that we do, that you are by legislation to develop guidelines for local AIG programs. In the absence of federal legislation, our state legislation guides our work for AIG programming across our state, which, in my opinion, it really allows us to do incredible work and helps us to meet local needs. So on the next slide, I just want to briefly give you a little bit of background in case we have any of our new members online or new listeners with us. That we do have a state definition in our law that's incredibly flexible based on local context. We are required to identify and serve academically or intellectually gifted students. And I say that because not all states do this. And so that is something that we're very proud about and take seriously in our state. Like Ms. Camnett said, every 3 years, we develop our plans, and so we have to approve guidelines for those plans, and we like to do it a year in advance. That way we can provide professional development and install them within time. So with the program standards, just to give you a little bit more background, they are in response to not just the legislation, but also in 2008. So right before I got here and right before Mr. Buxton had given me a call to see if I would be interested in coming here, there was a statewide audit done of gifted programming. And it found that it needed some more support, let's just say. And so part of that was to really clarify what your expectations were. I consider all of us a family, but your expectations are for gifted programming. So as a result, we developed these standards. Every 3 years, they have come to you for update, but they do provide a statewide framework for quality and comprehensive programming while honoring local context. So, which is such a gift that our legislation has given us. So that way, Mariah's school and Matthew's school and Tisha's school can all do whatever they need to do for their students and not necessarily have to meet a statewide criteria. These also help us to really ensure the academic, social, and emotional and intellectual needs of these students are addressed. So we are on this 3-year cycle, and they will be due summer of 2022. So these standards are being revised to really clarify the intent of the standards based on the responses from 3 years ago. We want to make sure our language is being interpreted correctly. But it also gives us a chance to really get significant stakeholder feedback, as well as to really bring in new best practices. And so, as you know, a couple of months ago, we shared with you our division's work around equity and excellence and our critical actions. The idea that we must see students at potential versus at risk. And that's something we heard in the planning session, kind of, all throughout it. Heard it this morning with that incredible student from one of our cooperative innovative high schools. But this idea of really ensuring that we are coming from a strength-based model, that we are providing a variety of services by a variety of professionals to really wrap around those services to ensure we are really developing talent and helping students optimize their learning throughout their K-12 experience. And in, looking at Dr. Jackson's words yesterday, to really help come alive this idea that all means all. And so today, the standards that we bring you did start back in 2019 with us looking at the data from those plan reviews, seeing which ones didn't bring out what we thought they would. And we went back through all of those plans and looked at that. We have been eliciting targeted feedback from AIG coordinators, as well as other stakeholder groups. We'll be talking to SACE next week to make sure they feel good. We've already sent it to them. Now, these are not student standards. So, of course, there's not the 2-year process that we have. Though we have taken 2 years, but this doesn't follow our student standards policy. But we have tried to really ensure there's still a system of development to ensure we are getting feedback from the field. We've worked with our IHEs that have gifted programs. We've reached out to various organizations, and they have been posted on our website. So we keep wanting to make sure that we are meeting the field's needs. So now we have Stephanie Cyrus, and in particular, Superintendent Truitt may never have met Stephanie Cyrus with us, and Beth Cross, 2 of our team members that have come here today to walk you through the standards. Stephanie.
Sneha. I want to call your attention to the attachments that we have provided for you to walk you through this process. Attachment number 2 is the red line version of the standard, so you can see all of the changes that we're going to be presenting today throughout the document. We're going to focus our discussion today on the umbrella standards and the practices therein, but you will also note that there is language in the historical overview that's been updated, as well as in the foundational statements. And then attachment number 1 is the detailed overview of the changes. It's the side-by-side comparison of the current standards with our proposed changes. So we'll drill down to look at each of the 6 standards, but we also wanted to provide for you as an overview summary of those changes that you'll see. So Sneha shared, this is a result of multiple stakeholder feedback over a great period of time. Throughout the standards, you will note that we consistently change the language away from parents and families to what we feel is more clear and better aligned to our legislation. And so you'll see parent guardian switch. You will also notice that in several places there are practices which may have been combined or collapsed together. And that is to remove duplicate information and to make the process more streamlined for our districts. So where it's logical to combine. You'll notice that in some standards, the practices have been reordered. And that is definitely to ensure that we have provided a more logical flow one standard to the next, or one practice to the next. And then again, finally, and most importantly, we've tried to thoughtfully interweave the language of our Equity and Excellence multi-year strategic initiative so that that's not something that's here today and gone tomorrow. So we want to take a look first at Standard 1, student identification. This is one where we have no changes to the umbrella language of the standard, but several practices and have slight revisions. And so I'm not going to call every one of those changes out, but I did want to highlight a few for you. I'm beginning with practice A. It's an example where we really have woven in some of the language from our Equity and Excellence Strategic Initiative. This new sentence specifically supports providing each student an opportunity to demonstrate his or her strengths, and more broadly supports universal screening. Practices D and F are examples where we have made some change to clarify the intent of the practice and to make sure we weren't duplicating information that's already in the. So D, shifting to focusing on monitoring how you are consistently implementing your plan, and specifically your screening, referral, and identification processes. And in F, the intent is really about how are we documenting the evidence that we gather and then reviewing that with some families. So a few other small changes, but those are the highlighted ones. And I'm going to ask Beth Cross to come on up. She's going to walk you through standards 2, 3, and 4.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon. I bring you standards 2, 3, and 4. So standard 2 is about programming. This standard provides expectations for programming, which is what kinds of services where districts offer and provide within their AIG programs. For standard 2, we did revise the overall standard language to include language that emphasizes and supports our Equity and Excellence initiative. But also clarifies the expectation that the AIG program does include an array of services for our students K-12. 2A is our first practice in the standard, and it talks about delivering an AIG program with focus on the academic and intellectual needs of our learners. It also streamlines the personnel who will be collaborating to meet those needs. Standard 2, or practice 2B on the next slide, is a parallel with 2A. This one actually focuses on other needs of our learners. We know that all of our learners have social and emotional needs, so there's a practice specifically for that. It's different from another practice in Standard 3 that I'm going to talk about. It also now has a parallel structure, as I mentioned, and it also provides more specificity on the personnel who will be collaborating for these programming options. We'll go on to the next slide to highlight 2G is a practice that talks about acceleration options in our districts. And there's only one slight change, and that is to add dual enrollment as one of our acceleration options to synergize and synthesize our work in the Division of Advanced Learning and Gifted Ed. 2H is a practice that already speaks to broadening access to all learners, to advanced opportunities. But here we added the importance of intentionally thinking through the mindsets, establishing practices and policies to realize equity and excellence. And we also, in this practice, included one of our critical actions, which is fostering talent development. We'll go on to the next slide, and we are now in standard 3, our differentiated curriculum instruction, the what of how do we instruct, or what do we use to instruct our students. And overall standard, there was just one word: diverse, ensuring that we're meeting the diverse needs of our learners. And also ensuring that we're thinking about them K-12. It's not a K-3, K-5, K-8. We have to have intentionality for our advanced learners through high school and beyond. 3G is a practice I want to highlight. It focuses on our K-3 learners and the importance of cultivating potential in all K-3 learners. The revision also captures the language from our Equity and Excellence Initiative, emphasizing the need for early intervention and development of all students. We'll go on to the next slide, and I'm going to highlight 3H, which focuses on academic and intellectual needs of our gifted learners, to differentiate from another practice in this standard that focuses on social and emotional. So it's very similar to what we had in standard 2. And again, the revision also broadens personnel who may be collaborating to meet these needs. Every district calls different roles different things. There are lots of different titles. So that's why we tried to broaden those titles a bit. Then standard 4 is our personnel and professional development. This is where we shift to the who. The who is meeting the needs of the students, and how are they and other staff prepared to do so. And in 4C, we broaden the title of the roles that should be targeted for professional development from special ed specific teachers to instructional specialists, which includes a wide variety, our EL specialists and other instructional specialists, including our special ed, and then also student support personnel instead of counselors specifically. The next slide, I have 2 new practices to share with you we're very excited about. 4E is a new practice that aligns with our standard. It's about the recruitment and retention of teachers and staff to teach our students, AIG licensed professionals, including those of diverse backgrounds, because we know that that's a focus. And that is to align with the language of the standard. 4F is also a new practice, and this aligns with our Equity and Excellence Strategic Initiative, our Critical Action 6, which is to provide focused professional development opportunities to specifically realize equity and excellence in gifted education. And then the last practice is a combination of 2. 4E and F were about professional development. One was about professional development and offering that and aligning that to district initiatives, as well as ensuring that the staff involved in professional development had the opportunity to collaborate and refine their learning together. And we felt like we could put those together. That professional development cycle includes both of those things. And with that, I wrap up standard for professional development, and I hand it over.
So as we look to standard 5, partnerships, practice A, this is an example of using feedback from the plans themselves in 2019. We found that there was a great need to really help districts and participating charters better understand what was meant by meaningful and intentional partnerships. And by adding that explicit connection to 2-way partnerships, we feel like that will greatly support the understanding there. And notice that 5A is about partnerships between parents and guardians. And what we've done here, this is an example now of reordering the practices. We've moved up the old 5E. That focuses on partnerships with external partners beyond just parents and guardians. So it's critical to think about and partner with parents and guardians, but also consider other external communities. So we've just shifted that to put them parallel side by side so that we can better focus and distinguish between those kinds of partnerships. And then the other change in standard 5, if we slide down, So we've collapsed the old 5B and 5D. Both of those were about communication. And so we streamlined these to make it much clearer for districts and to remove some repetition. So we've been really clear about what, in terms of what needs to be communicated and the audience that needs to receive communication. And so that's been pretty well received thus far as well. And then moving forward into Standard 6, program accountability. A couple of things I want to highlight here. First, in Standard 6 Practice D, you'll really see integration of the equity and excellence language here. And the focus is around collecting data that is really specific about student growth and achievement. And so the changes emphasize as well that our focus is on making decisions based on data current, and also to really think about trend data when you're thinking about informing mindsets, policies, and practices. So really kind of consolidated that data collection, but also streamlined the focus to growth and achievement. And then similarly in Practice E, we've woven in that equity and excellence language again, spotlight here being on access and opportunity. So we've thought about both the achievement and growth, and then we've streamlined Practice E to really focus on access and opportunity, thinking about things like representation and retention. And so you see that there's a nice parallel, but also clearly distinct, looking at two different kinds of data points. And then in practices F and H, still, again, this entire standard is about data and program accountability. But in F and H, those tweaks really clarify what to do with the data. The end goal is not to collect data for the sake of collecting data, but ensuring that we are using that data in making meaningful decisions. So decisions that aligned with the rest of their local energy plan, and that we are thinking about the data as we are evaluating and determining what things need to change. And then finally, in Practice I, there's a focus on sharing that data and being very transparent with the data that you collect throughout the comprehensive program evaluation process. So that was kind of a whirlwind, but that completes Standards 1 through 6. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sneha for your questions and our next steps.
Ms. Kamnitz, do you want to do questions about the standards now before I finish up?
Yes, I think that would make sense. Any questions on the standards?
This is Olivia. Ms. Kamnitz, I have a very quick question. I don't want to, while it's fresh on my mind, I want to go back or dwell on for just a minute, Standard 6, the data collection or
Yes, ma'am.
ring component. I'm almost sure at the last meeting, I raised a question about access and referral to our AIG programs because it had come to my attention in my region that some educators were saying to me, we don't know anything about referring students. So if we're, I believe in access. We're talking about equity. To me, this is a perfect example of building opportunity, closing opportunity gaps.
Absolutely.
So we could talk about that for just a minute, if you would.
Absolutely. So I've been thinking about what you mentioned in the committee, Dr. Oxendine, and if you're interested, I do, in talking with the team, we really feel like 6E, we could add referral data there. Referral data is something that some other states do look at, and I think it would be a great opportunity and really a gap in what we do. So I really appreciate you pointing that out, Dr. Oxendine. So in the next version, if that would be amenable, we can add referral data there as well. And then that way it's things that people are looking at. Some of our districts already do that locally, but this way there is a nice way to ensure that we are, in fact, outside of just the process of universal screening, which is the best way to do it, that we are looking at disaggregating and monitoring that trend.
To build on the word intentional.
Yes,
Here's a perfect example to do so. So thank you so much for that idea.
absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Oxendine.
Ms. Kamnitz, it's the superintendent.
Yes, go ahead, Superintendent Truitt.
So along those lines of the word intentional, I have a question about 2H. So it reads, develops mindsets, policies, and practices to promote equity and excellence by broadening access to advanced learning. through a variety of intentional efforts, including talent development at all grades. So my question is, what does it mean to broaden access through a variety of intentional efforts?
Sure. So actually, our guidebook has a lot of those examples that we shared with you 2 months ago. So one example is where at K3 or K2 in particular, to really ensure we are providing programming that is ensuring all students have an opportunity to show us their best. Sometimes we quickly make decisions, and those students more than likely do need access. So for example, you have a kid who comes in already reading Harry Potter in kindergarten. Does that student need something different than some of our kindergarten literacy practices? Yes, absolutely. So we want to maintain that excellence and keep serving that student. But at the same time, there are students who may not have had access to Harry Potter or may not have had access and the opportunities to have gone to museums or even to have that elaborative language at home. And so how are we creating opportunities where we are really intentionally seeking out potential? And for some students, that if we see that potential just once may mean just as important as if we see a student doing that every day. Because for that student at that moment, we saw this glimmer and that we want to capitalize that on then. We don't want the environment and the issues of economics, of culture, anything like that, limiting what we are seeing. In the past, we did a really good job at finding those students that we could easily tap. And we are one of the best states for that. We're doing a great job with that. We don't want to stop that. What we want to do is expand that and really make a conscious effort about how do we remove those barriers? How do we create that really level playing field, and especially in those early years to front load to help our students. Another example is our bridge programs to AP courses or bridge programs to dual enrollment. AVID is a great example. Other programs like that to really help our students K-12 think about the next step and how are we doing that. This morning, our student from Matt's incredible school, right? That idea of that cooperative innovative high school, those wraparound services, and really ensuring that student, we saw something and then we gave them support. So that notion are some of the strategies.
Thank you for that response. I would say that I certainly hope that what you're describing in K2 is happening every single day in every single class. It's probably not. And so I'm grateful that there is PD attached to this because it is going to take professional development to change that mindset.
And so much of all of this is, and all means all, right? And, we happen to have a label, right? For different things because it helps us to remind. But if we can really get that core class at such an incredible level, you're gonna see the potential. But if you only do it in one way, you're only gonna see kids who are one thing. Thank you, Superintendent. Okay, well, let me just wrap up then if there are no other questions about the standards. I did want to make sure, if we can go to slide 23, Dr. Townsend, is I did want to share a little bit about this idea of the system of change that we've been talking about at the board in the last couple of days, but that this has not happened unintentionally. We have been incredibly intentional about our call to action as well as our planning to ensure that we were going to get to this point where we could install them into the standards. This didn't just happen overnight and on a whim that Sneha woke up and said, team, write this down, we got to do this. I do that a lot. This didn't happen just like that. We had tried to focus on these efforts. Those of you that have been here, every time I come with the standards and we try to get things really making a difference, and it wasn't working. So we really intentionally, back in 2018, worked with districts to figure out what do we need, right, to make this We worked with stakeholders. We looked at the research. We then really started doing the PD and really installing this idea, really looking at the brief and the guidebook. So they had ideas. We've been doing PD nonstop, as much as our small team, but mighty team can do, holding problem solving sessions. And we're hopeful now, because of that growth for multiple years, and now getting the stuff into the standards, what we're hoping next year is to really use data and the standards to drive the policies and the practices. But then in 22-25, really see some change. I feel like it's one of the best efforts that we've done in our division to make this stick. And it really does follow this idea in an adapted way of implementation science, of taking it slow but meaningfully. Again, the other small piece in here is we did add other interested PSUs in the policy itself, just to let you know, charters and other PSUs do not have to have gifted programming, but we do have about 20 who do. And so we never had them in the policy. So we just said, and other interested PSUs. That way, that all is kind of dotted and taken care of. But again, our role is to ensure that our students all day, every day, all students are being cultivated and really given the environment they need to thrive. And our mission is to, it's like Dr. Jackson said, all means all, to ensure that we cultivate and respond to outstanding potential. I thank you for your time. And as always, your support.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw Coltrane. We also have 2 consent items to vote on this afternoon. The first is SLA 7, which is a policy amendment that basically moves the organizational and administrative structure of the Governor's School from the EC division to the Division of Advanced Learning and Gifted Education. And then SLA 8 is the State Advisory Council on Indian Education annual report that we received last month. And with that, Chair Davis, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. And just for clarification, if we could go back to SLA 4, the candidates that we are voting to approve today are Macon on the Governor's School Board, Macon, Waters, Doe, Elder, and Williams. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay. And so Dr. Townsend Smith, make sure our records clearly delineate that those 5 are what we're approving. Okay.
Then we will come back in July with that at large.
Perfect.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, moving along to our Educator Standards and Practice Committee, and I'll turn to my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the Educator Standards and Practice Committee. And joining me in that leadership responsibility is Ms. Amy White. The first item, which is an action on first read, this month we have 1 action on first read, 3 action items, and then 1 discussion item. So I wanted to get that summary of the items on the table. So the first item is ESMP1. This is a recommendation from the Advisory Committee on Extenuating Circumstances. We discussed 4 educators' request yesterday in closed session, and that's what we did. We discussed. So today we will be voting on those. I want to talk just a minute, if I might, about this committee. This committee meets periodically throughout the year, maybe 5 times. We don't meet monthly. We meet based on need, on the volume of requests that we get from educators who either need an additional year to complete their lateral entry requirements, or they might make a request to have some of those requirements waived. For the most part, the committee meets to hear requests on adding the candidate, or the educator needs an additional year to complete coursework. So this committee, I just need to raise them up because for the last several years, I've chaired this committee and I talk through the request rather quickly and then we vote to approve them. But I want to call out their names, the members who serve on that committee. Actually, we have a board member, Mr. Wendell Hall, who has just joined that committee and he serves in the vice chair role. And we also are honored to have Maureen Stover, our Teacher of the Year, who serves on the Extenuating Circumstances Committee. We also have Dr. Anita Alpenfels. She is the HR Director in Moore County. We also have Dr. Jane Stringfield, who is a professor at Lenore Rhine College. And we also have Dr. Laura Hart, who is on the faculty at UNC Charlotte. So they give of their time. They go through extensive documents that are provided by the educator. The person who is making the request must send letters from the superintendent, from the chairman of the local board, from the principal. Extensive information is included in the portfolio of transcripts and teacher evaluation data. So it takes an enormous amount of time to wade through that material. So I just really wanted to call their names and thank them. I think they were serving on this committee before I joined the state board. So that means they have 8 years plus serving on this committee. And I also want to, I've got to highlight Nadine Clipper and Susan Ruiz. They are on the staff, DPI staff down in licensure. And they are the two individuals who make this committee work. They provide the documents, they set up the meeting, they answer the technical questions. We couldn't do the work without their expertise. And then Tiffany Lucas is our counsel who keeps us straight on policy and law. So I wanted to take just a few minutes and talk about the committee because I don't know that I've spent very much time doing so. So we're going to be voting on those requests later today. The next item is an action item, ESMP2, and this pertains to, it falls under LICN 003, licensing testing requirements. This is a very brief item. It was presented last month by Dr. Evans. And Dr. Evans, is she ready to?
This Ms. O'Neill is your first one.
ESMP2.
ESMP2, yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm way ahead of myself. Okay, ESMP2 policy amendments. This is under CTED, which is our career technical educator section of licensing 004. So Ms. Lee O'Neill is going to be presenting. This is a series of revisions in the policy manual around the licensure, restricted licensure of our CTE educators. So Ms. O'Neill is going to take us through this information.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Good afternoon, Superintendent Truitt, board members. I'm here today to request your support for an additional revision to CTED 004 to accompany the revisions that we requested of you in April. As I explained last month, we thoroughly reviewed existing statute and administrative code in preparing the revisions to this policy. For this additional one I'm bringing to you today, we requested and received guidance from State Board Attorney Ms. Allison Schaefer. This revision is the removal of section 2.04 in that revised version of the policy, which governed pay escrow for CTE teachers with a Class V license. This has been in policy for years, and it placed high school degree and associate degree teachers lower on the teacher pay scale. DPI's formula for calculating experience credit for CTE teachers with a Class V license is to award 1 year of experience for every year of full-time relevant non-teaching work experience. This has already gone through the rulemaking process and is now established in administrative code. And it says, quote, for purposes of calculating salary, CTE license holders shall receive 1 year of teaching experience credit for each year of experience in CTE trade or industry relevant to the license area prior to becoming a teacher, end quote. So now we need to remove this conflicting section from our policy. We have talked with Financial and Business Services. And they agree that since CTE payroll funds are allotted in months of employment, districts are already receiving the necessary funds to pay the teachers at the updated rate. So there is no financial impact as a result of this revision. I'm happy to answer any questions for you.
Are there any questions? If there are no questions, thank you so much, Ms. O'Neill.
Thank you.
And we will go on to our next item, which is ESMP3 Policy Amendments. This is the presentation that was presented last month by Dr. Kim Evans. And these are kind of technical changes with respect to two of our licensing exams. One is in middle school mathematics, and as you see, there's a technical change in the coding of that test. It's changed to 5169. And the other technical change in terms of coding of the test is in secondary mathematics, and that's 5161. The passing scores have also, the cut scores have also been adjusted. And this adjustment is basically a change in revising test items, adding sections of test items. So it's not, even though the scores, we have, for instance, middle school is from 165 down to 157. It was pointed out last month by Dr. Evans that that doesn't mean that we've lowered any standards in terms of expectations of our math teachers in middle grades. If you look at the secondary mathematics test, we're moving from a 160 to 159, but those changes are just around some of the technical aspects and things that take place when you revise content items. Is there anything else that you would like to add to that, Dr. Evans?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions with respect to ESMP3? If not, we will move on to ESMP4. This is a policy amendment pertaining to the residency license degree requirement. And I believe that Dr. Tomberlin is going to walk us through the PowerPoint pertaining to this item.
Good afternoon, Dr. Oxendine. Thank you. Yes, this policy amendment is related to our general licensure policy, LICN 001. We have had to make a number of changes to this to conform to statute. The chief question that we had to answer was whether the language of the law requires a bachelor's degree or requires a minimum of a bachelor's degree. And you know, there are some unique situations where folks might get an advanced degree without an underlying bachelor's. And if that is the case, the interpretation of the law is that that person would not qualify for a North Carolina teaching license. So the bachelor's degree must be present regardless of whether there is a higher graduate degree that the candidate holds. I think we've got, this is the statute that we're referencing, and Dr. Townsend Smith, I think the next slide shows the policy changes. Oh, this relates to the GPA that a student must have to be admitted to an EPP. And if you'll go to the next one, you can see where these, I keep getting ahead of myself. We did bring this to Pepsi Commission, and as a result, to the Rules Council, we were asked to remove all the duplicative statutory language from this policy. So you will see more edits than what we've actually talked about here. But where those additional edits occurred, it was to honor the request of the Rules Council to remove the statutory language and just point back to the statute rather than putting that language in the State Board of Education policy. So here are the edits to the policy. One thing we do have to point out on the residency license, We did speak with both members of the legislature and with our internal legal counsel to determine whether the intent of the residency license was to apply only to what we consider an LEA, and not to a charter school. And the interpretation we received from both those entities was that the law should be construed broadly to include all public school units. And so we have made that change to the residency license policy to reflect that. And then, as you can see here, the language that we're actually discussing about holds a bachelor's degree is not in the policy because that's in the statute, and it will be visible to those folks who go to the statute to see the requirements for the license. And some of these other things are just formatting changes. And so here are the changes that we've made to this policy and the rationale for those changes. And I'm happy to answer any questions that any board members might have about these changes.
Are there any questions? Thank you so much. And the frame that I really like is the frame right before the questions that gives the change as well as the rationale. That's very helpful, Dr. Tomberlin.
Thank you.
And we will go on to the last item. The last item is a discussion item. This is going to be presented, I believe, by Dr. Tomberlin. And this is kind of a new item for me, or the topic is new. It just builds on so much around what we do as a State Board of Education in the area of standards and licensure and testing. And so this has to do with the educational interpreter performance assessment to increase the standards and the qualifications of these individuals. So I will turn it over to, I believe, Dr. Tomberlin, you are going to present this item?
No, ma'am, that would be
Sorry.
the EC department is bringing this.
Okay, very good. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Good afternoon again. We are here to present to you the item to look at the educational interpreter performance assessment and increasing that minimum score to continue to enhance services that are being provided to our students. With me, somewhere back there, Ms. Sherry Vernelson, who is the section chief for sensory support and assistive technology, which is where our support for teachers of the deaf, hard of hearing, teachers of the visually impaired, the Deaf Blind Project, and our educational interpreters are located and supported. And so I will start, but she is really going to carry the heavy part of this presentation today. So good afternoon again. It is a delight to be here to talk about this. This has been a long time coming. We have been working, as you will hear, for years to gather information to bring this before the state board. So we are submitting this proposal for discussion that would increase the current minimum requirements of educational sign language interpreters and transliterators for students who are deaf or hard of hearing in the public school setting. And that's really important because we're talking about educational interpreters. To provide some background and history for this request, the North Carolina General Statute, Chapter 90D-4 exempts educational interpreters and transliterators from having a license through the North Carolina Interpreter and Transliterator Licensing Board. And this was problematic because there were no standards for quality for these educational interpreters and our transliterators. Therefore, under the authority of NC General Statute 115C-315, back in 2004, the state board set a minimum standard requirement for educational interpreters of a 3.0 on the Educational Interpreter Performance Assessment, or the EIPA. Since that time, the standards have remained the same. But through diverse stakeholder engagement, we recognize that the level needs to be increased in order for our North Carolina students who require an interpreter for their education via sign language to be fully engaged and to access the curriculum as a component of becoming successful, productive citizens. And so now I will turn it over to Ms. Vernelson to go through the remaining part of the presentation.
Since the original minimum standard was put into place, the Exceptional Children Division has provided free professional learning opportunities to educational interpreters and translators in our North Carolina public schools to help develop their knowledge base. However, coaching support, which we know is a high-quality evidence-based practice, was not implemented until 2018. There is little research on coaching with educational interpreters and how coaching impacts score increases on this assessment. Therefore, the coaching component was designed and implemented prior to bringing this request to you today in order to determine its effectiveness. And so some data will be shared later about this in the presentation. To give you an idea of how many students and professionals this proposal would impact, here is some data for you. In accordance with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, North Carolina has 2 eligibility categories when deafness is suspected as a primary or secondary area of eligibility. And those are deafness and hearing impaired. According to the December 1, 2020 child count, of the almost 194,000 students ages 3 to 21 identified with a disability in North Carolina, 1,589 students were eligible as deaf or hearing impaired. So it's a very low incidence disability. And 169 of those students were eligible as deaf and 1,420 eligible as hearing impaired. According to our 2018-19 House Bill 317 data collection information, 193 students required a sign language interpreter to access their education. And just as a note, we did not require our public school units to report on the House Bill 317 data collection in 2019 and 20 due to limitations and stressors due to COVID-19. Some more data for you. There are currently 260 educational interpreters working, either employed or through a contract agency in public school units across North Carolina. And you can see their breakdown of the scores on this assessment. As a note, the average score of interpreters graduating from an interpreter training program is 3.3. According to Boys Town National Research Hospital, which is the administrator of this assessment for interpreters, a 3.0 or intermediate level generally indicates an interpreter at this level would be able to communicate basic classroom content, but may incorrectly interpret complex information, resulting in a message that is not always clear. As with any assessment score, though, this may not be a true reflection of a person's abilities, as several factors may influence the outcome, such as being nervous or testing conditions, that sort of thing. But again, these are general characteristics of an interpreter at this level. However, what is important to know is that classroom interpreting is more than just knowing how to sign or how to sign competently. So I can sign, but you would not want me being an interpreter for a student in an educational setting. It is the ability to process language quickly and accurately, thinking about English and American Sign Language simultaneously. It is also being able to support the student's educational outcomes and goals as outlined in the IEP. And while it was good for the state board to set a standard in the absence of licensing standards through the licensing board, it is time to raise the bar so students who require an interpreted education have equitable access to the curriculum and opportunity to be successful. So in 2014, a diverse stakeholder group was assembled with multiple feedback cycles over several years. The three main concerns expressed by the stakeholders were students' access to high-quality interpreted education, pay, and accountability. Additionally, the stakeholder group met with other states and found that even though they had higher standards or minimum score requirements than we did, the same concerns existed. So to address the concern of access to high-quality interpreted education, a coaching plan was developed and implemented. To address accountability, an interpreter evaluation tool was developed. And to address pay, the salary grades and the class specifications for non-certified public school employees have proposed adjustments along with some new minimum score requirements. So if we start with the coaching implementation, in 2018 and 19, this initiative was implemented. It was a collaborative effort with the Division of Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing and their interpreter specialists. There was a total of 8 coaches, and each coach attended the mindful coaching training so that the same practices would be implemented across each coachee. A coaching rubric was developed as well for consistency. A total of 35 interpreters across 2 cohorts completed the coaching, and each coaching cohort was 10 months in length. In order to establish a consistent baseline, each interpreter was required to retake the American Sign Language version of this assessment unless they had taken it within 1 year. At the end of the coaching process, each interpreter retook the test to see if there was an increase in their score. The average score increase with only 10 months of coaching was 0.2, with the highest increase being 0.7, and the lowest was actually a decrease of 0.3. Although this coaching initiative was short, it yielded results that we are confident will be even greater with sustained coaching over a longer period of time. Therefore, we would like to propose the following stakeholder recommendations with an implementation date of July 1st of this year that addresses each of the stakeholder concerns. So we'll look first at the recommendations to update the class specifications for non-certified public school employees. So on the left side of the slide, you will see the current general requirements for Educational Interpreter 1, which is a 3.0 on the IPA, high school diploma, 15 hours of professional development annually related to interpreting, and a salary grade of 62. And then on the right side, the requested requirements for this class specification would be a 3.3 on the EIPA for educational interpreters and a 2.0 on the tech unit for cued language transliterators. An AA degree or higher in educational interpreting or an equivalent, 20 hours of professional development annually, increases salary grade to 64. And then, I'll just go back and say, for the AA degree, just for your knowledge, we do have 8 interpreter training programs in North Carolina. 5 of them are in community colleges and 3 at university levels. And so the stakeholders felt this was very doable. Educational Interpreter 1, the stakeholders believe would be an entry-level requirement with 3 years for the interpreter to move to a 3.5, which would become the new minimum standard. And coaching would be provided over these 3 years to support the interpreter to reach the next level. In the class specifications, there's also an Educational Interpreter 2, which requires also a 3.0 on the assessment for educational interpreters, and it requires a 3.0 on the tech unit for cued language transliterators. It has an AA degree or higher or national certification from the Registry of Interpreters of the Deaf, and a minimum of 2 years experience in an educational setting. Again, 15 hours of professional development annually, and a salary grade of 64. The request would be to increase the EIPA score to a 3.5 for educational interpreters, to maintain the AA degree or higher, have a minimum of 3 years experience in an educational setting, increase the hours of professional development to 20 annually, and increase the salary grade to 66. We'd like to propose and request a new class specification for educational interpreters, which is Educational Interpreter 3. It would include a 4.0 on the EIPA, an AA degree or higher, or a national certification, such as the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, and 5 years experience in an educational setting. Again, the 20 hours of professional development annually, and a salary grade of 68. Once again, these proposed recommendations to class specifications would address the stakeholder concerns of high quality interpreting as well as pay. We mentioned earlier about an evaluation instrument, and stakeholder concern of accountability would be addressed in this area. The stakeholder or this evaluation instrument was developed with stakeholder input and the guidance of Dr. Robert Sachs, who you know as the Director of Education Standards and Evaluation. And it was piloted with 8 public school units across the state back in 2019. Feedback was collected throughout the pilot and recommended changes were implemented. The stakeholder group discussed whether the instrument should be required, similar to other evaluation instruments for related service providers such as occupational therapy and physical therapy, or if it should just be available to public school units and used voluntarily. The stakeholder recommendation was to keep it optional at this point in time. The increase in the minimum score requirement was a greater concern, and if too many new things are implemented at once, they felt it could be overwhelming. Should the state board decide to implement the new minimum score recommendations, stakeholders would like to look at making this evaluation tool required in future years. And this next slide just represents a reference of what the tool looks like, and you can see how it is similar to the other evaluation tools that are. And lastly, to talk about coaching. So the Exceptional Children Division is committed to the ongoing support of educational interpreters and cued language translators through a sustained coaching model. We are in the process right now of developing a long-term coaching plan to assist educational interpreters to meet the new requirements should the board accept them. We have a dedicated consultant, Mr. Antoine Campbell, who's here with us today, to continue this effort with this Division of Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. We'd also like to build a network of regional interpreter coaches to support this implementation as well. So I'd just like to thank you for your time and attention today. Take any questions that you may have.
Thank you ever so much, Ms. Vernelson, Ms. Thomas, and also Mr. Campbell. I will open it up to my colleagues for any questions or comments that you might have. I thoroughly am going to very impressed with the due diligence that you have given to this recommendation, the stakeholder engagement. It's all about quality and it's all about equity, and it's making sure that we are presenting to our students the best educators to deliver related services to our EC population. So I'm just impressed with the thoroughness of this item, and I will turn to my colleagues if you have questions or comments.
Chair Oxendine?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. This was so informative, and I'm very interested in this topic. Just as a side note, I knew some American Sign Language when I was younger and remembered the alphabet as a teacher. And when I taught in England, I had a student from Pakistan who was deaf, and he knew British Sign Language and American Sign Language, and British Sign Language is different from American Sign Language. And really the only way we could communicate was with what little I knew of American Sign Language. And he had an interpreter sometimes, but not all the time. So my question for you is just a matter of curiosity. What is the difference between Educational Interpreter 1 and 2? Would this be something that we would see maybe elementary versus high school, or not necessarily?
No, not necessarily. And Antoine, if you word, he's my interpreter specialist, so I'm going to let him answer some of those questions.
you.
Good afternoon. Right now, currently, there is no difference between educational 1 and 2 as far as experience, outside of years of experience in the school systems.
Okay, so a student being assigned an interpreter who's a 1 versus a 2 would just be a random thing right now?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you.
Other questions? So this will be out for 30 days for stakeholders and educators, others to consider it, raise any additional questions they might have. Then we will hear about it once again next month. And I can't imagine that we would go other than approving it. I mean, this is just impressive work, so I want to commend you for that. Thank you so much. So Chair Davis, that concludes my report for this month.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We'll now proceed to the final committee of the day, the Business Operations Committee, led by Vice Chair Alan Duncan. And before I turn the floor over to him, I ask that our records reflect that Ms. Kamnitz has recused herself from BizOp 2. It's Ms. Kamnitz with BizOp 2. Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you. Along with Todd Chastain, we represent the Business Operations Committee and have this report to bring to the board today. Our first item is approval of contracts over $500,000. You may have noticed that we have 11 of those this month, which is a lot. We have gone over those in some detail. I'll say our BizOp committee meeting for those involved with contracts lasted for a while on our most recent time, so we could go over these thoroughly. They're important contracts on important items, as is reflected by the amounts that will be expended on these very important contracts. So I don't know if there are any questions. I have not heard of any yet. We have a all-star cast of people available to us, either in person or on the telephone, to respond to any inquiries. So let me just open the floor. Are there any questions about any of these contracts, which have been, as I said, a lot of time's been spent on them, but we want to make sure all questions are answered. All right, not hearing any. We will go on to BizOp 2. BizOp 2 is the 21st Century Community Learning Center Summer Mini Grant recommendations. You'll recall that these are items that are not that must be moved quickly because they're to start soon and to be completed by September. And I believe we have Dr. Patricia Townsend here to guide us through this process.
Sure, absolutely. Good afternoon. I'm excited to present this information about the 21st Century Learning Communities. As you know, the 21st Century Learning Community grants are funded through the Every Student Succeeds Act. We receive about somewhere in the mid $30 million worth of allotments or allocations each year. Our allocation for this particular grant was actually $35 million last year. It was about $33 million the year before that. So when you think about 21st Century Learning Community grants, typically these are 3-year grants that are renewable. Individuals are able to get up to $400,000. However, we wanted to break the proverbial piggy bank. We had excess funds or funds that were left over, and we wanted to make sure that we try to spend as many of those as possible, and understanding that there has been quite a bit of learning loss as a result of the pandemic. We wanted to offer entities an opportunity to apply for those funds. And so we came up with a summer mini grant opportunity in which we were able to offer entities anywhere from $50,000 up to $300,000 to produce a quality summer program. When you think about 21st Century, there can be LEAs that apply, charters, governmental agencies such as the Boys and Girls Club, faith-based organizations such as churches, IHEs. It just varies with this particular fund source. We welcome them all. In terms of our competition, we decided pretty early on that we were going to do this. We began advertising for this back in February and have provided a number of technical assistance opportunities for those who wanted to apply. Those applications were due in March. We were able to go through the process of scoring those applications, and we are here today for you to approve those recommendations. When you think about our application scoring process, we actually use an external committee to review those applications to ensure that we are fair and impartial. And so once that external process has been done, we then move into an internal scoring process at DPI by which we are able to add a series of priority points. And then the last level is level 3, which is your approval for those recommendations. Do want to speak a little bit about our competitive quality bands. As you think about quality bands, one of the things that we noticed, or one of the things that Vice Chair Duncan talks to me often about, is making sure that we are doing our level best to ensure that entities have the necessary skill to actually create a grant application that would be acceptable. We find time and time again, there are entities that are not able to create a grant application that would put them in a place where they could actually receive grant funding. And so we do have to make sure that we address this matter, and we are really working hard to provide technical assistance so that our grant applications are better. But until that time, we still have to make sure that we have standards and we keep them. For this grant competition, we were able to fund applications that were in the excellent, strong, and average categories. Weak and unacceptable, we were not able to fund those. In terms of our applications, we had 49 applications, and we had a very good distribution as it relates to geography. We have struggled in the past to make sure that we have applicants in all areas of the state, and so I'm happy to say that we did get applications from all areas of the state. We actually had enough money, and Vice Chair Duncan and I talked about this at length. We had enough money to fund everyone who applied. However, we were not able to fund those poor applications. And so if you move to the next slide, you will see that we were able to recommend to you today 41 applicants. Okay, and then we can move to the next slide. And so this particular slide really shows you information about distribution when you think about how many applied versus how many were actually able to be recommended. And so we do see, if you move to the next slide, you will see that there is a great distribution as you look across all 8 regions. Our lowest regions are the Western region and the Northwest. The others are pretty similar in terms of the amount or the number of applicants. And then if you move to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about the types of applicants. So when you think about the types of applicants, you could either be a PSU or a non-PSU. So those are your churches, your Boys and Girls Club, your YMCAs. We had 30 PSUs to apply, and so those would actually be school districts, and or we had a few charters, and then we had 19 PSUs. In terms of the recommended rate, PSUs had about 83% of them being accepted, and then we had 84% when we look at non-PSUs. And so it's about the same. And then when you look at the distribution across PSU and non-PSU, we have 61% PSUs receiving or being recommended for funding, and 39% of non-PSUs being recommended for funding. And The last slide that we will go through really looks at the distribution of dollars, very similar to the number. You will see a little bit of difference here because not everyone received the maximum amount. The amount that you actually received could be up to $300,000. However, if you chose to do a program that was shorter in duration or serviced less students, then you would, of course, receive less money. The next few slides, I will not call out each entity's name, but the next slides, you will actually see that information in your board packet. I've listed all 41 there. Okay. I'll turn it back to you, Vice Chair Duncan, if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you very much for that report and for going through the methodology. I think that's important to the members that you do that and the care that you take with it. And please accept our thanks to you and the staff that work so hard on that. You have no shortage of things going on with federal funding responsibilities right now,
Yes.
federal grants. Are there questions or comments by board members on this particular summer mini grant program?
And that grand total was $8,675,000.
And just to confirm, it needs to be spent by the end of the summer.
Yes.
So this is a concentrated time. Hopefully we'll be well coordinated with our efforts to take on the learning challenges, the office of, and the work that's being done by the office Michael Maher is heading, and DPI. Hopefully it'll be good coordination there so that we're singing from the same book of songs. So,
and we have been in touch. We did have less interest in this, and I think it really had to do with House Bill 82. These funds cannot be used to fund that program. It is going to be, these funds need to be used as a supplement, which we held several technical assistance sessions for districts to give them some ideas. And so perhaps running the required portion in the morning and then running 21st Century in the afternoon and using that as more enrichment time and using those funds in that way. So we tried to really be supportive to LEAs if they really wanted to participate and help them figure out how they really could do that.
yeah, thank you for pointing that out because there's a little bit of a conflict in terms of time for this, along with the requirement of the 150 hours of summer school for many of the same students who are affected. So it's an excellent point that you added in. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this program and these awards? All right, not hearing any. Let's go on then to McKinney-Vento summer mini grant recommendations. We are on to the summer mini grant program right now. And I believe, Dr. Townsend, you have maintained your spot at the floor.
Yes, I'll be here for a while. So McKinney-Vento, of course, services our homeless youth or youth who are experiencing homelessness. I really try to make sure that I get my terminology correct. Our state coordinator for homeless students is actually Lisa Phillips. And so she tries to keep me connected. And I do believe she's on the line if we have detailed questions that need to be answered. But McKinney-Vento funding is extremely important. It really helps assist students who are some of our very most vulnerable. And so anytime we're able to increase the amount of funding or get additional funding out the door, it really makes my heart sing. And so these funds are actually authorized by Title 7B of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And that also appears in the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015. And so in terms of this particular fund source, it is used to facilitate the enrollment, attendance, and success in school of homeless children and youth. And so LEAs, or I should just say PSUs, they can use these funds to do a variety of activities that are meant to support these students. And there are 16 ways that they could use those funds, and I will not read them all to you, but they can use these funds for supplemental tutoring, defraying the cost of transportation if students have to go further, if they are living in a shelter that is outside of the area of the school that they used to attend or currently are attending but are now not in that service area. Just a variety of ways that those funds could actually be used. And Lisa and her staff, they do several technical assistance trainings with homeless liaisons to actually make sure that, that entities understand how they could actually use those funds. Now, in terms of this particular program, typically when we're thinking about it, you are eligible to receive McKinney-Vento funds if you have 50 or more homeless students in your school. Well, that actually ended up ensuring that many would not be eligible. And so Lisa had the idea to actually expand that to make sure that others could actually get the funding. So if you were not eligible under our regular McKinney-Vento, this would give you an opportunity to kind of get wedded to the program and understand what you could actually do with those funds. While you might not be able to have an exact program in your district because you don't have a number of students, you also could actually have a consortium. And so by having this one-time funding for the summer, it is just allowing them to get their feet wet with this particular fund source to see if they would want to come on board on a full-time basis. And so for this particular grant, we used our contacts within the districts to let them know about it. Information was sent out via email as well as various listservs around the state. They were invited to submit an application by April 8th. And then that brings us to today. After those applications were reviewed by an internal committee, we were then able to make a recommendation for funding. We are recommending that 48 charter, lab, virtual, or ISD schools actually receive $4,000 each. And that LEAs receive $10,000, and the grand total of the funding would be $382,000. And again, we are very mindful of the distribution by region, and so we do see a good distribution in this case. You will see also a good distribution as it relates to LEAs and charters. And so the amount that goes to each is about the same, $190,000 for LEAs and $192,000 for charters. Are there questions about McKinney-Vento?
It is significant to note that many more charter schools actually applied than the LEAs. You may comment on that, Dr. Townsend.
Sure. And so I think it really goes back to the criteria that we set within the state. And so before I even came on board, the allotment policy for McKinney-Vento actually stipulates that you have to have 50 students within your LEA, or in this case, charter. And so many of them did not really meet that threshold. We also need to understand the times that we're in. We are in a time where people are struggling and more people are finding themselves in situations where they are homeless. So there is a much greater need. Also, you will see with this particular fund source, North Carolina, well, all the states in the nation are receiving an additional bump to their McKinney-Vento allocations through the American Rescue Plan. And so we recently received an allocation for $5.8 million that can then be added to what we typically do. And we are expecting a bit more. All in all, with the American Rescue Plan, we're expected to get about $17 million. And so conversations are underway with the National Center for Homelessness as to how we could actually utilize those funds to make sure that we get the most bang for our buck.
These mini grants will be helpful in determining and preparing our districts and charter schools for how to do that. So, Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair. Duncan, I had a student this past semester who did extensive research on this law, this law rather, the funding, the program itself. And I can't begin to tell you the impact it had on her, because she had no idea that these funds were available in the schools, in her school. My question is this, though, with regard to the tutoring of a child who's homeless, I would imagine that would have to be individualized. Is that right?
It can be, and I think there are a lot of ways that that's deployed within the state. In some cases, they will use tutors within the school, and so they will be able to pay teachers extra duty to do that. Or in some cases, they contract with, I guess, an entity that provides tutoring to offer services for that child. And so in some cases, it is individualized.
Thank you. That was my question.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments about these summer mini grants? All right, not hearing any, we'll go on to BizOp 4. And Dr. Townsend will retain the floor still. This is the item our Ellis grants for the request for proposal approval from the board for Ellis grants. Dr. Townsend, I'll just remind you in baseball, strike three and you're out. So you, in fact, will be out after this one.
Okay. So the Ellis program stands for Extended Learning and Integrated Student Supports. And so this grant program has been around for a while. It typically is a state-funded initiative. However, with the influx of pandemic dollars, it has shifted to being federally funded. So the last iteration of this particular grant program was with CRF funds. And so we had programs that ran from last March through December of 2020. And we did actually do a report on that, and that was submitted to the General Assembly. But these particular funds have been earmarked by the General Assembly. They actually come from the ESSER 2 funds. And so they have earmarked about $15 million to be used for this particular competition. I will remind you that Ellis is actually for nonprofits. And so nonprofit entities by themselves or nonprofits in conjunction with an LEA may apply for these funds. Entities may receive up to $500,000 within this particular grant program. It does have the caveat that grants have to be matched on a 3-to-1 basis. So for every $3 in Ellis grant that you receive, you have to have matching dollars. If you're working with an LEA, that could be in-kind services, such as allowing someone to actually use their facility to actually run this program. Now, Ellis, we consider it to be either a school day program, and so that's the extended learning support part of it, or it could be an after-school program. It just depends on how the entity writes up the grant award. And so there is no formal presentation for this. However, there is, in your board packet, you will find the RFP that we will be utilizing for this grant program.
Very good, thank you. On this particular reminder, these Ellis funds, Ellis 2 funds come from the 10% set aside that the legislature went ahead and allocated for how they would be used. So we're now carrying forward what was put into law by the legislature and their distribution of the Ellis 2 funds from the 10% hold back for the SEAs. So the matter to be voted on will be approving the request for proposal.
Yes. And if approved, we'll run the competition, and the applications will be due in August, and then we will come back to the board with applications for funding in October.
Any questions or comments? Dr. Townsend, thank you very much for your reports on all these things and for the work that's going on. And I think we can all readily see that you and your office are extremely busy.
But it's a labor of love. We really want to make sure that the funds are in the hands of people that can really make sure that students are taken care of. And so it is truly a labor of love. And I'm honored to be able to be at the helm of such an amazing staff.
What wonderful sentiment for us to hear. Thank you so much. Our fifth and final action on first read out of BizOp committee is BizOp 5, which is the Federal Grant Policy Amendment Century Community Learning Centers for the summer mini grants and for the McKinney-Vento summer grants. This is for allotment purposes. And we have John Kiefer here.
Good afternoon.
John, welcome. You are
Thank you.
new to us, so please introduce yourself and then tell us about BizOp 5, please. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Good afternoon. John Kiefer. I am the Public School Budget Manager, the Division of School Business and Finance. I can take my mask off. That'll make it a little bit easier to talk.
Thank you.
Just trying to be conscientious. Yes, so I'm the Public School Budget Manager in the Division of School Business. Today, we are presenting several changes to the allotment policy manual. The first two items are the updates to the 21st Century Community Learning Centers program and the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act programs. Those are PRCs 110 and 026 respectively. These changes correspond to the summer mini grants that Dr. Townsend just presented. Since those are new programs, we needed to update the allotment policies for those programs to allow for the distribution of these funds. For both of the PRCs, the changes simply outline the award amounts for each of the respective summer mini grant programs, state the period of availability for both of the mini grants, as those are different from the normal grant timelines, and highlight for both programs that funds may only be used for allowable expenditures under each of the two programs. So they're very straightforward, simplistic changes, but that will allow us to timely allot the funds for these important summer programs.
John, thank you. Are there questions or comments for Mr. Kiefer on this change in the allotment policy to accommodate these new grants? All right, not hearing any, that completes our actions on first reading, and we do go to one discussion item, BizOp 6. But John, Mr. Kiefer, we've enjoyed having you on board so much. You're going to handle this one too, I gather.
Happy to do so. So for this item, this is more of an, I don't say annual cleanup, but periodic cleanup of the federal grant programs within the allotment policy. The majority of the changes are organizational and stylistic. We have reorganized the federal PRCs within the allotment policy manual to more closely align with the divisional structure that administers the program, as well as to align with the way that school business typically presents data related to our federal programs through the budget highlights and other presentations that we give. We've updated citations, we've corrected any spelling and grammatical errors. We've ensured that all the formatting is the same to ensure that the document reflects the standards that DPI wants to have for its allotment policy manual. We also have content updates for some of our PRCs. We did provide the summary document, but some of the ones to draw your attention to, we did take time to make sure that we added language to characterize the reallocation method for any PRCs for which DPI has the authority to reallocate waived funding or any other reallocations that are required under federal statute or regulation. Most of the PRCs had that language, but we wanted to make sure that all of the PRCs did, and there were a few where that was missing. We also added language to clarify the Title I carryover flexibility that we have received as an agency from the U.S. Department of Education, to our ability to approve waivers of that requirement more than once every 3 years. We moved language related to the allotment of unallotted previous year funding for programs for which we no longer reallot funding in the way that was described in the policy manual. And then for some of the specific changes for individual PRCs, we did make updates at the request of the Federal Programs Monitoring and Support Division to the Title I Part A School Improvement Formula grant program to clarify the ADM measures that are currently being utilized in the funding formula and to raise the base allotment from 50,000 to 75,000 as an effort to better target the funding to districts that are going to be able to utilize it more efficiently. We removed the hold harmless element of the formula for Title II Part A, which is PRC 103, as the hold harmless requirement was eliminated when ESSA was passed in 2015, and we had not gone through and made that change in the allotment policy. And we removed the PRC, the policy for PRC 091, which is the Small Rural Schools Achievement Program. That was not an actual allotment of funding. That was a vehicle for districts that receive the SRSA program from the U.S. Department of Education to utilize certain statutory flexibilities that they're permitted to utilize for Title II and Title IV funds. We were advised this past winter by the U.S. Department of Education that we needed to account for that flexibility in a different way. And so we've eliminated that PRC from the manual and will no longer.
All right, very good. You will have these for a month to pore over and study and come back with any additional questions you have. But if anyone has any questions right now before we vote on it next month, please, Dr. Oxendine.
I'm just fascinated by the topic of allotments. I don't know why, but all of a sudden I am. My question is this: what constitutes the creation of a PRC?
Well, anytime we have a new federal grant program or a new federal funding stream, or a state grant program or state funding stream outlined in general in a General Assembly budget or statute, we would create a new PRC so that we could account for those grant funds separately. So, for example, with all of the COVID funding for each of the different grant programs that are either created by the CARES Act or the ARP or CARISA, or that were created by the General Assembly through House Bill 196 for the ESSER 2 funds, or by the state board for the ESSER 1 budget, we would create a new PRC to allow PSUs that receive those funds to account for and track those funds separately.
So is a code ever retired?
Yes, if a grant program is no longer in existence, or like with the SRSA PRC, where we're not allowed to utilize that anymore, we do have a process to retire PRCs. We do have to maintain the numbers for a certain number of years for audit purposes and for other reasons. But I do believe even though it's not utilized very frequently, we do have a process that if we needed to retire a PRC that we could.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Additional questions or thoughts, comments? All right, not hearing anything, Mr. Keefe, thank you very much. We're very glad to have you on board and appreciate your help through these policies. Our one consent item is Biz Op 7, which is our, not unusual to the board, certification of finance officers, which we do quite frequently. On a monthly budget report, a reminder, starting next month, we're going to start a series to go through the budget in some greater detail. The budget is a large item, and so what we're going to do is to take small bites for several months, and Alexis Chalice is going to lead us through the budget and help us work through documentation for the budget that will be helpful to the board long term, but to help give us a deeper understanding of the various pieces and construction of the budget. I look forward to it. I think we all do. It will be helpful in her past work on showing the sources of funding, for example, through the last 2 years. I think it's been very well received by the board, and we're appreciative of the work that will go into to walking through this in a way that'll make it very understandable, not just for us, but for the public. Agency vacancy report, unless there are any questions on that, although I think, Mr. Paxton, if you're there, I know you wanted to point out at least one of the slides that's helpful to the board. Yeah, you're here, better yet.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to take a minute on the last slide and the very top piece of it. Our line flattened out, and it flattened out simply for timing. We had 16 positions that were vacancies that were filled, but we don't have, as they say, butts in chairs yet. They haven't started. And the time that we gathered this data, those still counted as vacancies. So once we get those seats filled, and we actually have people here, you'll see the line will realign and it'll look a lot better. As of today, we've got, of that 16, I think there's only 2 that have not got butts in chairs. So we're moving in the right direction, and I wanted to make sure that we were continuing that momentum.
Yeah, very helpful. These charts are helpful too. So it's really been a great addition to have these charts in here. And the work that you're doing to get the positions filled along with the many colleagues in the department is much appreciated. Right. So our last 2 items are executed contracts report and the planned contracts report. I have not heard of any questions or comments about those, but I want to open the floor in case anyone has any, so we can try to be responsive to them as quickly as possible. Anything? Not hearing anything. Chair Davis, return to you with thanks to the many staff members who have helped us.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. One addition to our records on the BizOp committee, Ms. Kamnitz has recused herself from BizOp 2, 4, and 5. So our records could reflect that. Mr. Ford.
Yes, could the record reflect my recusal from BizOp 3 and 5 as well?
Mr. Ford recused from BizOp 3 and 5. Okay. Very good. Well, colleagues, that concludes our committee work for the day. We do have one item of new business, which takes us back to the report from our partners in DHHS concerning adjustments to the Strong Schools Toolkit. And so in regards to that item, as we have customarily done to adopt the most recent version of the Strong Schools Toolkit, I'll offer this motion for consideration when we move to adopt action items. It reads as follows: consistent with Session Law 2021-4, the North Carolina State Board of Education approves as official guidance for in-person instruction for the remainder of the 2020-21 academic year, unless otherwise extended or modified, for all elementary and secondary public schools in North Carolina, the requirements outlined in the Strong Schools North Carolina Public Health Toolkit K through 12, issued by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services as it existed on March 4th, 2021. And further, the board approves the May 5th amendments to that toolkit, as well as any other amendments presented to the board as of this date, provided such amendments are not inconsistent with Session Law 2021-4. You can tell that was written by an attorney, a highly skilled one. Any questions about that particular motion? Essentially, we're adopting the toolkit as is presented today. Very good. Then, colleagues, will now vote on any items requiring action from your committee reports. A thorough discussion and report was provided on each item, including any respective consent items. And just as a reminder, items on the consent agenda are primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion in a prior month. I note also that board members have seen these consent agenda items for at least a week. So at this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from the consent, action, or action on first reading agendas for separate vote. Hearing none, I request a motion to approve the following: the April 7th through 8th, 2021 meeting minutes, the April 19th, 2021 meeting minutes, the April 28th, 2021 Executive Committee meeting minutes, following committee items: EICS 1 through 4, SLA 1 through 4 and 7 through 8, BizOp 1 through 5 and 7, ESMP 1 through 4. Also, the adoption of the most recent version of the Strong Schools Toolkit as published by DHHS in accordance with the motion I read just a few moments ago. And then the following items from our closed session meeting last evening: IPL and ILT licensure approvals, requested residential school hires, requested ISD school hires, and the extenuating circumstances committee recommendations. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
By Dr. Oxendine, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hall. And a note for the record of Ms. Kamnitz and Mr. Ford's recusals that mentioned earlier from BizOp items. Is there any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, we call the roll to capture the vote.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Sorry, just for the record, I can do it. Yes.
Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you, colleagues. That concludes our action items for today. I'd like to thank all of our staff, presenters, and everyone who worked on making this such a productive 3 days, and most of all to my colleagues. We had an awesome learning opportunity, and we look forward to working together to make the appropriate changes in our system to increase opportunity and access for all students and the successful education of all of our students. We have much work to do, but I think we got a great team and we're going to get it done. So thank you so much. I now ask for a motion to adjourn this May 13th, 2021 meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Oxendine, second. Second by
Second.
Mr. Ford. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Yes. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. We stand adjourned. See you in June.
You're not probably considering. Well, they're not voting. Their votes don't. Like the airport.